pass through you when you leave me room.
Sagittarius, control of speech, control of thoughts, lead into truth. Hello everyone, welcome to this month's Virtue. It is quite something to recognize how much the esoteric pictures that stream through this wisdom schooling really helps us to understand the world that we live in. It also helps to give us insights that strengthen us so that we can manage in a way some of the errors that face us. And this month's Virtue is one of those that really is prominent in our society at the moment. But before we go into that, I'd like to speak a little about wisdom, because every time we bring something into this realm of thought and speech, even if we speak out of a wisdom-filled place, we are speaking out of something that becomes in itself only partial, because the nature of speech and the nature of thought is to be able to bring into the world a certain aspect of what needs to be spoken of. Many of you would understand that as we've gone through the virtues each month, and as I talk about certain virtues, I'm only obviously coming from a direction, a ray of that light that might help to grow the ray of light in your own thinking. It may be that what I've said about a particular virtue is also what you already recognize in that virtue. The reality is, when we bring something into this realm of thought and speech, it becomes to some degree limited. And the effort we need to place in keeping a connection to a wisdom that is whole and not limited is what helps us not to limit what we're saying too strongly. And yet it will always have its limitations, because how to speak around the wholeness without creating, in a certain sense, a way of seeing and perceiving a particular point of view. And the point of view comes as we try to bring something into the realm of thought and speech. Now, this reality gives recognition to the fact that wisdom will have many rays, like light itself is dispersed into these 7 rays. So wisdom is something that is growing and unfolding. And we can see that without our deeply grasping this, we will create, in a way, a stance that can cause conflict when someone else holds a very different point of view. So we're about to approach the Christmas mysteries, and you can follow the link below if you wish to be part of that. It's for weekly courses where we work into these deep esoteric mystery, where light itself, born into the darkness, is understood. Not in its entirety, but each year we attempt to know a little more about the light, a little more about what it births for us. And part of that, of course, is connecting us to this deep mystery knowledge, which helps us in our freedom. Because the more we can awaken to this true wisdom, the more we are liberating ourselves from our limitations. Light, as it reflects itself in the earthly world, is in its nature limited. Where we come to the unlimited light, that unlimited source, is as we grow our wisdom. And we can see that humanity itself is walking that path slowly and surely, growing towards greater and greater light, so that we may find in that greater and greater freedom. But freedom not for freedom's sake, but freedom because it is where we are free that we can truly love. And this being the mission, and as we spoke about at the very beginning of these virtues, in the introduction, the mission of humanity's relationship to the earth is to develop love to its fullness. And so that we will have a journey towards that. But love requires our awakening to freedom. And freedom is developed through us going from the limited to the unlimited. Now, we can experience the limitations, and they are great experiences of learning. If you are born in a particular circumstance, your learning and your unfolding is different than in another. But inner development slowly and surely allows us to grow beyond the limitations and find greater freedom. The limitations that I have of my own biography, the limitations I have of the blood bond, even the limitations that one would experience in our indoctrination into the world that we are perceiving as reality. And this is an extraordinary journey for the human being. And so it is these schools of wisdom, these esoteric schools that support us in that journey. And there are many schools of wisdom. Even though we might look at these archetypal 7 rays of light dispersed by the one light, there are, of course, many ways of how that expresses itself. But the wisdom ideally leads us to that place where we can grow beyond our own limitations. And so as we go towards these Christmas mysteries, we learn more about working with that, and that the real journey that keeps us connected and united is remembering the mission of our humanity to grow and develop love. The wisdom will lead us to our freedom, and where we are free, we can love. So freedom esoterically has a different relationship to our inner life than we talk about as freedom in the worldly world. In the worldly world, we think freedom is that I can do what I want with who I want, when I want, or all of these aspects of freedom. Free to think what I want, free to say what I want. And these are things that are incredibly important because they give us a sense in this limited light what we are working towards. But how do we surpass that? How do we surpass that limitation so that we really are free? And we can begin to recognize this with very genuine inner development that my thought life is limited. My speech is limited. Even the language itself, the fact that it cannot be understood by the whole of humanity, brings us into a limitation. So this virtue is incredibly significant in our times because so much is spoken about in controlling the speech, controlling the thought of the other. And yet it is not for anyone else to control that in you, but it is for you to control it in yourself. Why is it important? Because when you have the capacity to control your own thought life and control your own speech, you begin to have a kind of mastery over a limitation in yourself. And it is that part that can control the thought life and control the speech that leads you to going beyond your own limitations. We call this the I capacity, the I am activity. Now, the I itself is the place of which the human being will experience the greatest freedom, not in the limitations of your thinking, of your feeling, of your volitions, your capacities, but in this I am consciousness. And one would say therein lies one of the deepest realities of our quest in life to grow our understanding of what it means to be a bearer of the I. Because the I is a two-edged sword. On one hand, this freedom is going to lead me to this potential awareness of the unlimited light, the divine life. It is here in the I, in this I am consciousness, that I can initiate into the mysteries of the divine and understand the possibility of being a bearer of love, a bearer of light, a bearer of the truth and realities of the Spirit that can bring peace and harmony to the world. That's one aspect of the human I. But we're also aware that this human I, on the other edge of that sword, is tinged with this nature of selfishness. In its limited I am consciousness of my personal self, of my limited everyday self, the human I can work to want to appropriate everything for itself, to keep wanting to take this life and make all of these given gifts mine, to actually create a system that benefits me. And this side of the human I is the destructive element that goes in a way against love. And yet, herein lies this mystery that we stand with. Here, in this human I, for me to truly love, I must be able to not love. And to know that in ourselves and yet still turn towards love. To choose love because I am free enough to not love. Now we're beginning to see this momentum towards this reality that is quickening in our world. The choice, will I love or not love? Will I choose to appropriate this world for myself, for my people, for my way, for whatever it is in my limited self in this incarnation? Or in this I consciousness, will I choose to work with the divine love? So there is this extraordinary connection between being able to take hold of our own limitations, our limited thought, our limited speech, to control those inner processes that are limited so that we can awaken through that self-control, self-mastery, and only through the self-control, self-mastery can we awaken this inner freedom. Now, one could say that the adversaries know that if someone else can control your thought, if someone else can control your speech, then you can't awaken your freedom. Well, let us say that no one but ourselves can work inwardly towards this liberation, and no one, regardless of any laws of the land, can take away this possibility of self-liberation, even if it is attempted through limiting your thoughts and limiting your speech. It's still not a possibility. It's a tricky diversion that makes us fight for the wrong kind of liberation, or the liberation that doesn't lead you to true I activity and freedom. And here we see in this virtue, this really potent virtue of truth. Truth, which will be accessed through this fullness of wisdom, through this fullness of freedom, comes through our ability to control our own limitations, to not let the limited thoughts be the thing that determines what the truth is, but to recognize that as we stand now as a humanity, we have limitations. The principles of science could help us in this direction if science was to recognize that we're consistently in a place of discovery. But when science actually is held in the egotism that wants to appropriate life for itself, and it's misused under this control, then it isn't helping us in our quest for liberation. So we are slowly learning to free ourselves, and we actually learn it in a strange way in the dance of the unfreedom. It is the pain of the unfreedom that draws us towards this liberation, or it draws us towards war. And so in these virtues, we develop slowly towards an overcoming of our limitations. And it's clear that each of us have our limitations, but each of us also bears some ray of light that if we can bring them together, we may build towards a greater wholeness of wisdom. We don't need to fight each other's insight, but rather work together to grow that wholeness of wisdom, because it is there we are offering each other another way towards our individual freedom. If something someone brings can grow you beyond your limitations because you have taken that thought in and helped it to break open the limitations of your own thoughts, then you are beginning to grow in your own possibility for greater freedom. Now, there are many ways of which we limit ourselves. The intellect, as an extraordinary tool, can also be a deeply limiting force on truth. It needs to work in a way where it maintains a doorway to the unknown. And we really show our ability to do that once we have an awakening within our own I experience. If you know the I, if you know in your I am consciousness, you stand on a threshold of an unlimited freedom and a very limited experience, and you can recognize these qualities, then you will also understand why, as the human being tries to understand itself, that we are needing to become more aware of what is this I am consciousness. Now, there are many ways the human being does this, and I've spoken about this in several areas. You know, for one of the things that we do under the understanding of the mysteries is that we place our inner world outside of ourselves. We do this on a mass scale in humanity, where we've placed the human will in these machines of will, where the machines do all of the things that we used to do by hand. We've placed the human feeling into the machines of feeling experience. You know, we used to be able to have a great deal of experience before we could assess something like an illness condition, or whether a plant was healthy or unhealthy. The more experience we had, the more we were able to make those assessments. But now the machines do that for us. The blood work does that insight for us in the medical world. We use pathology, not years and years of acquired experience. And as we've put in these capacities outside ourselves, it's allowing us to grow in our knowledge, and yet it also can give us a sense of weakening something in our own possible intuitive capacity. And then, of course, we have now learnt to put our thinking to some degree outside of ourselves. In the computer technology, we have placed this world of thought outside. And it isn't so pretty to see the thoughts of the world scattered everywhere. But it's important that we come to know ourselves. And so we use this kind of machine world to put ourselves outside of ourselves. These sort of human developed forces upon earth are ways of us getting to reflect upon who we are as a humanity. And with AI, we are beginning to put this human I outside of ourselves. this self-autonomous machine that won't need input from outside of itself. And we want to discover this human I. It's one of the ways of which we understand who we are in looking at ourselves outside of ourselves. But the caution with that, of course, is understood by those that have come to know the human I, not just our tendencies in our thought life and our feeling life, but this nature to want to appropriate everything for itself. If that lives in a machine outside ourselves, we should be concerned. And this is something that we are now embarking upon. So inner development allows us to understand these forces not through projecting it outwardly, where we get to see our human limitation in relationship to it, but by entering into the inner world and recognizing how to develop it inwardly. Developing your will forces happens as an inner activity. Developing your feeling capacity is an inner process. Developing your thinking capacity is an inner process. For you to extend beyond yourself, it's working with your I on your own inner forces. And this part of inner work actually grows and strengthens the human being. When we put ourselves outside of ourselves, we get to know ourselves only in part, with the potential that it weakens our possibility. It doesn't have to, but the potential is there. And so we have this potential that the human I will be weakened in this relationship to AI. And if we are not to have it weaken us, we are called to work with it inwardly. One of the great ways of developing that is through your own free will, controlling your own thoughts. So meditative life in the Western esoteric path is not just observing thoughts pass by the mind as though they are a leela, a dance, a unreality, but rather being able to control the thoughts I'm choosing to have. And so with that in mind, I'd like to work with one of the archetypal thoughts that we work with esoterically to understand part of the mystery. And that thought is, wisdom lives in the light. We contemplate it by holding that thought in our consciousness. In the process of that, we bring in our attention, directing our thought out of our own will, so our thought life is maintained in a direction of our choosing. And the direction is something that belongs to the mystery. Wisdom lives in the light. Whenever we concentrate and deeply contemplate, we remove ourselves from the external world, we remove ourselves from the me, and from all the agitation that can be created through the dynamic with the sense world, and it brings us to what's possible within. Now, for many, that agitation is in their internal world, and it takes time with practice to move inwardly and find the place of peace. But if we can concentrate our thinking, we can amplify that activity towards inner control, leading us to remove the outer uncontrolled influences. Wisdom lives in the light. And then we move to the formula, I am, and concentrate on the third eye, bringing our attention from the third eye towards the back of the head and down the spine to our attention rests in the area of the heart. Control of speech, control of thought, leading to truth. And those of you following the verse, Sagittarius, becoming achieves the power to be. Into what is, the might of becoming dies. Achievement resolves the desire to strive. Into prevailing will force of life. In dying, there ripens prevailing of worlds. Forms disappear within forms. What has come to be, may it feel what is. Then we let go of all of the words, all of the thoughts, and just try to be active into the inner space where you're resonating with what has been spoken, but not thinking, no content, just the resonance of your thought life. And if you choose to, you can then extinguish that activity into the emptiness.
I am the one who shines through you.